advisor to the Ayatollah. He actually just put out a statement this morning saying, among other things, that they are going to vigorously continue their missile activity, and also saying that President Trump shouldn't make a toy out of himself, I think is how he put it. Where does this go from here, do you believe?
Well, the UN Security Council passed a resolution telling the Iranians stop developing missiles, long-range and short-range missiles that can disrupt the balance of power in the region. Iran has been a bad actor. They've basically toppled 4 Arab capitals. So it's just not Trump, it's the UN itself, credibility at risk. So here's what I would do. I've had it with the Iranians toppling pro-American governments throughout the region, being the largest state sponsor of terrorism, capturing our sailors, flaunting the missile test ban. It is now time for them to pay a price. They have a pair of twos. We have a full house. I don't want a war with Iran, but we want to make them stop.
Well, I mean, right along that line, you want them to stop, but what do you think Trump will do if Iran fires another missile?
Well, I think the world should not only condemn Iran, but we should have multinational sanctions against the regime for their continued violation of UN Security Council resolutions regarding their missile program. And here's what I would tell the president to do. The deal we have with Iran regarding their nuclear program is a bad deal. In 15 years, they can enrich and reprocess and make a bomb without even cheating. What I would like to see is peaceful nuclear power throughout the Mideast. This is a chance for Russia, China, the United States, maybe France, to build power plants throughout the entire Mideast for the Arabs and the Iranians, and we just control the fuel cycle so nobody can turn it into a bomb. That would be the offer I'd make the Iranians. If you want a peaceful nuclear power program, you can have it, but we're not going to give you the ability to enrich and reprocess uranium because you can turn it into a bomb.
Let's see what the next response is then from President Trump on this. Let me ask you about the travel ban. You've spoken out about it. You called it a self-inflicted wound in the fight against terrorism. The White House, though, right now doesn't even want to call it a ban anymore after some awkward back and forth. Why not, do you believe? What are they concerned about with regard to it being called a ban?
Well, I think the enemy has seized upon this. We're treating people all the same. The interpreter helped us in Iraq, and he's a hero in my mind. Got a young lady from Clemson who's from Iran, who graduated from Clemson, works in a startup company in Clemson, South Carolina, beloved by her colleagues and the entire Clemson University community. She was taken off a plane in Dubai. She had a legal visa. So what I would suggest is that people like her and the interpreter, people who've already been vetted with a visa, they not be treated as if they're a terrorist, because they're not. I do support a timeout in terms of future refugee flows from these countries until we get better vetting. We sort of screwed this up in the rollout.
Well, President Trump had a few choice words for you, not surprisingly, after you spoke out. He called you weak on immigration and that you're always looking to start World War III. What strikes me about the president's response on this one, though, Senator, is that there were a lot of Republicans that were critical of the president's executive order, but he singles out you and John McCain. Why do you think you get under his skin so much?
I don't know. I look forward to helping the president where we can. It's not being weak on immigration to have a system that can tell the difference between the young lady in Clemson, who is a value-added product to our country, the interpreter from Iraq who helped us, and a real terrorist. That's just being logical and having good common sense. I'm not trying to start World War III. I'm trying to win the war against radical Islam. And the worst thing you can do is declare war on the faith itself. And the way we've rolled out this executive order, we're catching people in the web that clearly are not terrorists, and that helps the enemy. So I would try to reform this executive order to focus on the problem, which is future flow coming from unstable, failed states, which makes sense to me.
But it doesn't, look, the president isn't acknowledging any fault in the rollout. I mean, he's still calling it a success. There's no problem with the rollout that they've seen so far. I mean, if the president's not going to acknowledge that there was a problem in how they rolled it out, sure doesn't seem that they've shown any openness to reforming what they've put in place so far.
Well, I think General Kelly and Secretary Tillerson are on the case now. They're actually working with us to try to restore this young lady's visa. She went back to visit her mother.
Doesn't the buck stop with the president on this?
Totally. Totally. Here's what I would say. I would say that the rollout was flawed. The idea makes sense, a timeout in terms of future flow, but we got to have a system that can tell the difference between this young lady and an interpreter and a potential terrorist. it was screwed up. And that happens. The rollout with Gorsuch was terrific. Well done, Mr. President. There's a lot of things he's doing I support, but at the end of the day, when something happens on your watch as president, you're responsible for it, and it's his responsibility to fix this system in a way that we could all appreciate. And I think he can, and I hope he will.
Well, speaking of things that happened on his watch, there are new details out this morning, Senator, about that covert operation in Yemen where one Navy SEAL, Ryan Owens, was killed and a number of civilians were killed as well. You're on armed services. You get these briefings. What have you heard about the operation, Senator? Do you think it was approved with sufficient intelligence, with sufficient planning?
Yes, and unfortunately in war these things happen. And I really appreciate the fact that President Trump went to Dover, Delaware to be there when the body came home, to show respect for the fallen SEAL, to comfort his family. I think that goes a long way to our military members, to show that our Commander-in-Chief cares that much. Yeah. But yes, the operation I think was authorized properly, and these things happen in war, and I think overall we're going to have more of these operations, not less, because ISIL and Al-Qaeda, they're getting stronger, not weaker in certain parts of the world.
Coming up next, we're going to have more with Lindsey Graham. There's more to this conversation. Why he says Russia should be punished. Why the senator, though, is hopeful about the Trump presidency. And in just a few minutes, we are going to hear from House Speaker Paul Ryan. This as the Senate continues to try to push through President Trump's cabinet nominees. We will bring you Paul Ryan's remarks live. Plus, violence erupts on a college campus, protesters throwing fireworks, rocks, and more. And then President Trump threatened the university where this all took place. To move on from investigating Russia's hacks during the election, one person who's definitely not moving on, Senator Lindsey Graham. He's now pushing for a new investigation. I asked him what more he wants to know.
I will never be satisfied until the Congress and the White House work together to punish Russia for trying to interfere with our election. I don't think they changed the outcome, but they clearly tried to manipulate the outcome. So the current sanctions are in place based on their taking of Crimea. There needs to be new sanctions imposed against Russia for interfering in our election. So I'm working with Democrats and Republicans to pass new sanctions. I hope the president will embrace them because Russia needs to be punished. I am in charge of the Crime and Terrorism Subcommittee on Judiciary, along with my ranking member, Senator Whitehouse. We're going to have an oversight hearing regarding the FBI and try to learn from the FBI what Russia actually did, to see if we can validate the intel community's findings and tell the FBI to go after all things Russian and try to figure out how to prevent this in the future.
That's news that you're going to be pushing this, probably in, I assume, classified hearings.
Mostly.
Maybe not open, mostly. Are you going to have any open hearings on this, maybe?
Yeah, what I want to do is try to get people to come forward and explain what Russia's doing all over the world, not just in our backyard. What tools they have in the toolbox.
Touching on what they're doing in our backyard, do you fear at all that this sets you on a collision course with the White House? Because they want to move on, in their words, from these hacks.
I promise you this, I will not forgive and forget when it comes to what Russia did regarding our election. As a matter of fact, I've got a resolution I'm drafting up now to be offered soon that says an attack on one party by a foreign entity is an attack on all parties in the United States, kind of an Article 5 compact, that we're in this together, that when one party is compromised by a foreign entity, the whole process is compromised. So working with Senator Whitehouse, I want to find out what the Russians did in totality, go wherever the evidence takes us, try to prevent this in the future, and work with my colleagues in the Congress to deter Russian behavior. If Donald Trump, President Trump, forgives Putin for what he tried to do in our election, then that will scream weakness and the world will get a lot more unstable.
But what happens if you send him a sanctions bill and he doesn't sign it?
Then we'll override his veto. I believe.
Think you can?
I don't know. I believe that most Americans are offended by the fact that the Russians did hack into the DNC and Podesta's email. They did leak this to WikiLeaks. It was an effort to compromise and put doubt in our election, and they're doing it all over the world.
So tomorrow will be the 2-week mark for President Trump, his presidency. For you right now, are you more or less hopeful about this president since Inauguration Day, Senator?
I see a trend that is somewhat hopeful. I think the rollout of Gorsuch was well done. The pick of Judge Gorsuch was a home run. I actually recommended this man to be picked. So I thought the rollout, the pick was great. I think some of the executive orders are long overdue about deregulating the government. If we can repair the damage done with the executive order and get back on track and have a timeout to failed states in the future, then better days lie ahead. The infrastructure bill, I hope that comes soon. So things are trending a little bit better. I want to help the president where I can, but I'm very intent on being Senator Graham. And Senator Graham would push back against Russia no matter who was president, and I intend to do that.
And that might be the major bone of contention between you and President Trump. Senator Graham, hopeful, though, on this presidency. That's a headline. Great to see you, Senator. Thank you, as always.
Thank you.
It sure was. And you can see, I mean, if he wants to work with President Trump where he can, but he's still going to be pushing more investigations into Russia. You can see, you can almost imagine the amount of pressure that he's under in the fine line that he's trying to walk.
And he is one of President Trump's favorite punching bags. There's no question about it. Every time he says something, he does risk reaction on Twitter from the president or even out loud. So it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, what happens with that relationship for sure.
All right, the president says that it's time to be a little tough, but he also asked for prayers, not for world leaders, but for Arnold.
Lily, sleep comfortably again.
All right, that was President Trump again at the National Prayer Breakfast this morning, asking for prayers for Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Apprentice ratings, and there was rapid response from the former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, on just that subject. Joining us now to discuss this and I think more serious issues as well.
And some more.
Jess McIntosh, former Director of Communications Outreach for the Hillary Clinton campaign. Mike Shields, CNN political commentator and former Chief of Staff to Reince Priebus. And Reed Wilson, national correspondent at The Hill. Reed, I guess let me start with you, because on the one hand, this was the National Prayer Breakfast, and usually you pray for things like the country, other countries, peace, well-being, things like that. It's unusual, I think, to pray for television ratings for The Apprentice. On the other hand, Reed, I laughed. And I also laughed at Arnold Schwarzenegger's comments from Arnold Schwarzenegger. So is this okay, or is this over the line?
When was the last time President Trump did anything where you thought to yourself, oh, that was normal? I mean, this is a White House that's going to blaze a new trail and start a new path. And it's a president who is completely unscripted, somebody who is more comfortable talking off the cuff about his own success, about, as we saw with this phone call with the Australian Prime Minister, about his election results, even in conversations with international leaders, than he is in sticking to
hang on 1 second. We're going to listen to House Speaker Paul Ryan taking questions right now.
He's a very important ally. Australia is a very essential ally. They are, and they will continue to be. I think it's important that presidents and prime ministers, heads of state, are able to have candid and private conversations with one another.
My second question.
Wait, twofer.
The president also referenced Arnold Schwarzenegger today at the
Oh, did he? Did he do the accent or? Say that again.
Schwarzenegger tweeted to the president that perhaps they should switch
Oh.
jobs. Trump should return to the Apprentice.
Yeah.
He should be president.
I'm not going to comment on this stuff. Let's talk about policy. Let me go in the back.
So you often mention about choice in healthcare. Is there some particular model you have in mind for that? I mean, most employer-based health programs have one, maybe two choices for insurance. I mean, what is the model for that you would point to?
Yeah, the model is the plan we ran on last year that you can go to better.gop and take a look at. What we think is you want to have a vibrant individual market, a vibrant employer market. We want Medicaid to work. We want Medicaid to work so that the states can innovate and so that doctors actually take Medicaid patients. We want Medicare to be solvent. We want Medicare to be something you could depend on and know that it's going to be there when you retire. So what we mean is choices. We don't want one choice. That's not a choice. We want to have more insurers and providers in the marketplace competing against each other for our businesses, consumers, and patients. We want patients and their doctors being the driving force and the nucleus of the healthcare system instead of some government regulator telling you what you have to buy, where you have to buy it. We don't want just one insurer. We want a lot of insurers competing for our business. That's what I mean when I say choice. And the whole point of all of this is it's the cornerstone of the free enterprise system in America. The more choices you have, the more competition there is, consumers benefit from that. And that is obviously true in healthcare. And it is one of the big reasons why Obamacare is collapsing. Look, you heard me say how few choices and options there are because of Obamacare. It is not coincidental then that we have double-digit premium increases every year, that the deductibles for Obamacare exchange plans are 3 times as high as the deductibles for people in the large group insurance market that they get the health care from their jobs. So clearly this law isn't working. It is collapsing. And yes, this is what we call a death spiral. You're not getting the kind of pooling that needs to be allowed with choice and competition to get rates down. So we have to step in and replace this law before it gets too late, before people lose what their insurance.
About all this discussion about the word repair that you guys are starting to use.
Yeah, the words you're talking about. Right.
There's been some pushback on that, and you guys have probably just said you guys are having a vocabulary change. The allegation there that you're intentionally rebranding it. Can you respond to that?
No, I'd say there's just a miscommunication or a misinterpretation of what we're trying to say. Our job is to repair the American healthcare system and rescue it from the collapse that it's in. And the best way to repair our healthcare system is to repeal and replace Obamacare. It's not an either or. If you want to repair the American healthcare system, you've got to repeal the law that is destroying it and replace it with a system that's much better. Yeah. Hey, thanks for, I know most of you, but thank you for saying who you are.
Can you give us an update on the timeline for the Affordable Care Act next step? I talked to Chairman Upton. He said he wasn't sure exactly when the committee was going to be moving language. And then also a follow-up to Nancy's question. Do you believe that businesses should be allowed to refuse service based on sexual identity or sexual orientation?
No, I voted for ENDA 2004 or something like that. I can't remember when that bill was. So, no, I just don't believe in discrimination in the workplace, period. But back to your healthcare point, what was your healthcare question? The timeline, yeah. So I'll defer to the chairman when he wants to have his markups, but we want to be moving our Obamacare legislation by the end of the first quarter. Yeah.
Do you support capping the exclusion for employer-sponsored plans?
I always have. That's something that, there's no secret. The bills I put in place, I had a bill with Tom Coburn, Devin Nunes, and Richard Burr when we were debating Obamacare that did that. So my own position is very clear. Where Congress goes on this is an open question on that thing. That's one of the ways you can finance tax credits. There are a lot of other ways of financing tax credits as well. Yeah.
You obviously spoke out forcefully last year about the Muslim ban. I'm wondering if you're totally comfortable right now with Trump's executive order and the provisions that give preferential treatment to minority religions.
That's a good question, because this is not a Muslim ban. If it were, I would be against it. We are a tolerant, pluralistic country. We are and we will be. It's really important. The bill we passed last year, if you recall, after the Paris shooting, it became clear to us that one of the terrorists infiltrated the refugee population coming from Syria. So we wanted to make sure that didn't happen here in this country. That's just sort of like national security 101. And then when we inquired among our professionals at Homeland Security and the FBI, can you properly vet these people to make sure that this doesn't happen in America? They said, no, we can't. And so that's why we passed legislation with 289 votes, big bipartisan bill, saying let's pause this program until we can figure out how to get it right. That's effectively what this is about. So to your point about religious persecution, presidents always and often put preferences in refugee populations. I think President Obama had one for sexual orientation. They didn't call that a sexual orientation test. He put a preference in for sexual orientation. Religious minorities who are being persecuted, there's nothing wrong with preferring religious minorities from persecution. Yazidis are being persecuted. Sunnis in Shia countries are being persecuted. Christians are being persecuted. So there's nothing wrong with saying we're going to take into account minority religious persecution with our refugee situation. Chad.
What about the question about Australia, the question here with the executive order? What about the perception of receivers? And do you have concerns?
Yeah, no, of course I do. Of course I do. I think.
People say he did get into the grill of the Australian Prime Minister.
I think. Well, like I said, I didn't even read the transcript, so I can't speak to the president's.
Perception is, even if that's not true, there's a perception.
But I do think that there is a perception issue, and I think this loose rhetoric that suggests that this is a religious test or a Muslim ban is wrong because it furthers that perception, because this is not that. So I do think it's important for people to pause and look at the actual context of this. Look at the press conference that Secretary Kelly had to put this in its proper perspective so that it is not misinterpreted as being something that it is not.
The point he had to
I said this on Tuesday. I think the rollout could have been done a lot better. Look, green card holders. I mean, nobody wanted green card holders to get caught up in this. So I think that, yes, the rollout could have been done much better. I think we all know that. But going forward, let's make sure that we're not saying this is something that it's not, so that we further misperceptions.
Tell me who you are. I'm regarding Rex Tillerson's contribution. Are you concerned that now that he's the Senate at the State Department, that the Trump administration will now try to relax sanctions on Russia?
Well, my position on sanctions are pretty clear. I think Rex Tillerson is going to be a great Secretary of State. I think people who don't know him or haven't followed him very closely are going to be pleasantly surprised. This is a very, very capable man, and I think he's a good model for Secretary of State. I don't know what their policy is going to be with Russia. I'm a Russia hawk. I think the sanctions should have been done a while ago.
Sherman. Do you think a lot of this stuff, you talk about the rollout, this came through Congress? Wouldn't this have been a more smooth process?
Are you talking about the executive order?
Yeah.
Yeah, I obviously think that they could have done a better job on the rollout of the executive order. I think that they don't even have a full cabinet in place yet. So I think it's pretty important to get their cabinet up and running so that these interagency reviews can be done well. And I think going forward, they're going to do a better job of these things. Yeah.
Second on Australian broadcasting, Donald Trump tweeted this morning that he's going to review this so-called dumb deal with Australia. That's the first we've heard from the President directly about what's been a very confusing series of messages from the White House and State Department and Australia. Is it problematic that this is the way diplomacy is being conducted, and should Australia be worried about its relationship with the new president?
No, I don't think Australia should be worried about its relationship with our new president or with our country for that matter. I know your country well. I've met with your leaders continuously over the last number of years. So no, Australia is a very important, essential ally. It's going to continue to be. You haven't maybe been to many press conferences. I typically don't quote or comment on the tweet of the hour. So.
Last question.
On appropriate.
No, Wall Street Journal.
Do you think that additional sanctions should be placed on Iran? And do you have any
I would be in favor of additional sanctions on Iran. I think I'd like to put as much toothpaste back in the tube as possible. I think the last administration appeased Iran far too much. I think they went too far with Iran, and I think as a result, Iran is far more activist than it otherwise would be. Iran, don't forget, is the largest, greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world, the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Iran writes on their missiles in Farsi, Hebrew, and English, death to America, death to Israel, and then tests them. So this is not a friendly country that has global peace or national security interests in their mind. So yeah, I think we need to have a tough on Iran policy. I think we should stop appeasing Iran.
All right, you hear right there, House Speaker Paul Ryan at his weekly press conference, making a lot of news, hitting out a lot of topics with reporters, including talking about the latest tensions that have been rising just overnight, really, between Australia and the United States, getting a couple questions about that, and also about the now new Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and that's kind of where I want to continue the conversation with our panel here. Mike Shields, let me bring you in on this. So he was faced questions about Australia and then the reports of the heated call between the president and the Australian Prime Minister. And Paul Ryan kept hammering the point that it's an important ally and will continue to be. But if you're Rex Tillerson and you walked into the State Department today, you're speaking to employees for the first time and he made a good first impression with his remarks there. But what does he take on first? He's got problems with Iran, Australia, and Mexico, and that's really just overnight.
Well, look, I mean, we're a month into President Trump's administration, and he inherited essentially a failed foreign policy of the American government. Weakness abroad. You're seeing strength now towards Iran, weakness even among our allies. And so the world has been saying to us for years now, please lead, America, lead. Someone needs to be the leader, and you play that role. And in Europe and in South America and other parts of the world, they've behind the scenes been saying we don't have the strength of American leadership in the world now. And so Rex Tillerson is going to be a strong Secretary of State. Donald Trump is going to be a strong president, and you're seeing that. And look, a phone call with...
Right, but is strength getting in a fight with the Prime Minister, one of your allies on the phone, for the first phone call you have? Is that the kind of strength you're looking for?
Well, sure. I mean, and the president said
come
he's
on,
going
Mike.
to be
Do you think the Prime Minister of Australia was looking to be talked down to by the President of the United States if that's what happened?
Well, we weren't on the phone call.
The President of Mexico, wanted to be told something about bad hombres. And Angela Merkel, who apparently, had a conversation with the president that he didn't like all of. That's how she wanted it to go. I do appreciate what you're saying, that you were against a lot of the last administration's foreign policy, and this is a clear break from that. But the idea that the rest of the world was asking for it, I'm not sure there's much proof to that, Mike.
Oh, well, I mean, it's documented. Our allies were saying, we have a lack of leadership from America. Will you please lead? Now, you may not like the tick-tock of a phone call here or a phone call there, and certainly this administration is pretty transparent, and we get to learn about a lot of these phone calls. But what you're seeing overall, the big picture of strength, Iran is shooting off missiles because suddenly there's been a change in the White House and a strong leader is challenging them. I mean, I'm surprised Iran still has missiles. I thought the Obama administration made them peaceniks, right? That's absurd. The country voted, by the way, against the Iran deal. Dozens of ads were run in congressional districts and Senate races across the country against the Iran deal because the American people did not like the weakness that Obama was showing towards Iran. Now President Trump is showing strength towards Iran, and they're sort of overreacting to it. So I think overall, when the question you asked was about Rex Tillerson, I think that he's coming in to be a strong Secretary of State. He may be the good cop versus the president's bad cop. We'll have to see how that dynamic plays out. But certainly in the first month of the administration, there has been a marker laid down that the president intends to be strong on the world stage, and that's precisely what the American people voted for in the last election.
One quick point on the point of transparency. The White House, Kellyanne Conway said this morning that the leaks didn't come from the White House, so they weren't trying to be more transparent about these phone calls, even though Donald Trump seemed to confirm that it was heated at the National Prayer Breakfast today. But, Jess, you get to jump in on this.
I think that I don't envy Rex Tillerson his job this morning. I think going in needing to smooth things over with one of our biggest allies, talking to Mexico about the fact that we're probably not going to be sending troops across the border to take care of bad hombres, and Michael Flynn popping off about Iran without seeming there to be a strategy behind it, that's a really tough position for Rex Tillerson, who I didn't have a lot of support for before, to come in with. I think that there was this tendency during the campaign not to take Donald Trump seriously, not to take him literally. He was a showman, he was a deal maker, he was going to come in with a different style of leadership. And now that we're actually seeing it play out, it turns out that he meant exactly what he said. When he campaigned in December of 2015 on a Muslim ban, we are now watching him put that in. And I don't envy Paul Ryan either, having to stand up there and say that that's not what it is.
Because the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is at the White House meeting with members of Congress on the Senate Finance Committee and House Ways and Means Committee. Getting a first look at the tape. Let's listen in.
Yeah, Spencer, Jeremy, how are you? Okay. Excited to see you.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you, Senator. Good to see you. We're going to start getting our trade in order, and I know you like that. Well, it's going to be one thing we really get along on, right? I think. So thank you all for being here today. Great honor. We have put together an all-star team of top-level people that are working on trade. We are working very, very hard and will be very soon as we get the go-ahead. We have the 90-day period that we have to think about, but we want to get that whole thing kick-started and going. We have some statutory limits, and we don't want to have those statutory limits, so it's very important. I have very serious concerns about NAFTA. NAFTA has been a catastrophe for our country. It's been a catastrophe for our workers and our jobs and our companies. They're leaving our country. I want to change it, and maybe we do it. Maybe we do a new NAFTA, and we put an extra F in the term NAFTA. You know what the F is for, right? Yeah. Free and fair trade. Not just free trade, free and fair trade, because it's very unfair. So all of the statutory guidelines we're adhering to, I would like to speed it up if possible. You're the folks that can do it, Senator, so important. And we will make great trade deals, and we will have something that will I don't care if it's a renovation of NAFTA or a brand new NAFTA, but we do have to make it fair, and it's very unfair to the American worker and very, very unfair to companies that do business in this country. That's why they're leaving, one of the many reasons, including the taxes are too high. We're going to take care of that also. You all know Wilbur Ross, who's one of the great people of Wall Street, and he's going to be representing us in negotiations along with a lot of other great people. So we've really assembled tremendous talent, some of the best in the world. Carl Icahn called me, said, "I can't believe you got Wilbur." Wilbur on Wall Street is just known as Wilbur, and he's one of the greats, and he's fair, and he's fair to other countries. He will be fair to other countries, and I think we're going to have a whole new picture by the time we finish. So I just want to thank the four of you for being here. We're starting the process, and I think it's going to be a tremendous thing for our country, for the workers, and for our companies that employ the workers. And thank you all for being here. Okay? Thank you.
There's Jared Kushner right there, of course, Donald Trump's son-in-law. Sitting right next to him is Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce right there. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, went on at length about how much he likes having Wilbur Ross in his cabinet, and he was meeting there with senators and members of the House and the powerful Finance Committee and Ways and Means Committee, and the President says he wants to talk about NAFTA, creating a new NAFTA with an extra F for fair. Reed Wilson is with us right now. You know, it's clear. I was wondering what this meeting would be about. Would this be, Reed, about tax policy?
Right, exactly.
Would it be about Obamacare? Yeah. But it's about trade, which goes to show, I think, where this administration wants the focus to be on these early days.
And this is an interesting group of senators because, as we've seen over the last couple of months, trade does not break down along partisan lines. There are elements of the left that really want to see NAFTA revisited and revised. There are elements of the right that want to see the same thing, and there are elements of both sides that like these trade deals. It's interesting that he brought in Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. Wyden was a big proponent of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and took a lot of heat from it back home in Portland and around Oregon. A lot of protesters came out and protested his role in backing the TPP, while his Democratic colleague, the more liberal Jeff Merkley, was a big opponent to the TPP. So this is an area where President Trump is going to be able to find allies on the Democratic side, he's going to be able to find allies on the Republican side, and he's going to find some enemies on both sides as well.
Yeah, that surely seems clear, Reed. And Jess, this is one of the things this is one of those campaign promises that Donald Trump made. I mean, he said that he didn't like NAFTA. He called it, again, a catastrophe here. Today, he wanted some kind of a change or maybe a renovation, he called it. And this is one of the reasons why he won. This is how he won over
He made a number of campaign promises relating to NAFTA. He was going to get rid of it entirely. Now he wants to overhaul it. Now he's just going to add an F. I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump doesn't spend a lot of time in the actual details of the policy that he's now in charge of. The idea that he thinks he can have a contentious conversation with one of our biggest allies and that isn't going to result in America being less safe. If we renege on deals that we have made with other countries that we have always been there for, that's not going to have a negative backlash on us. That he can be vague about what this Muslim travel ban is, what it applies to, which people, which families it applies to. That he can talk about NAFTA in a way that he doesn't care whether we scrap it all together or just redo it or add a couple of things. It doesn't matter to him. The fact that he doesn't understand that those kinds of vagaries and that uninterest in how our policy, foreign and domestic, works, the fact that he doesn't get that has a really detrimental effect on the American psyche and the actual realities for Americans, that's incredibly frightening this early on in the presidency.
Well, we'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, I think it's crystal clear that he wants to change the trade posture of the United States going forward. Mike Shields, it's also clear that will force a big change among some members of the Republican Party, including Orrin Hatch, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, who was in that meeting, including House Speaker Paul Ryan, who we heard speak before, who were very prominent supporters early on of TPP. They are prominent free traders, but now you get the sense, at least for now, they're all in with this president. They're pretty much saying, we've got your back no matter what. It seems like they will sublimate some of their own views for his benefit.
And part of that is because they're listening to the American people. I mean, the American people elected President Trump on this agenda. And it's interesting hearing Jess saying what he doesn't get. I mean, what the Clinton campaign and what Democrats didn't get was his message. They didn't get how to talk to these voters that really care about trade in this country. And, you know, Republicans on Capitol Hill, going back to 2010 even, have really started to chart a different course on trade. So this isn't actually something new, and there's a lot more support on Capitol Hill than you might believe among Republicans to take a new look at some of these trade deals. But look, in the end, there's going to be trade. The president's been pretty clear about what his agenda is. He ran on this agenda. He's bringing people from both parties together to work on his agenda. I'm sort of like, what's the problem with that? And that's exactly what you'd expect the President of the United States to do. And he's the one who's in touch with the American people. He won. And I think politicians on Capitol Hill are starting to recognize we need to listen to the American people on these issues. It's
fascinating to see the alliances that are formed around something like this. Guys, thanks so much for bobbing and weaving with us on the moving parts today. We really appreciate it. And there's this, unnecessary and harmful. That's what Senator John McCain is calling the reported dispute between President Trump and Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull after reports of a tense phone call between the two leaders. And this just in, McCain says that he also called the Australian ambassador to the United States to express, quote, his unwavering support for the U.S.-Australia alliance.
So the former U.S. ambassador to Australia, Jeffrey Blake, joins us right now. Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much for being with us. You did work in the Obama administration. Let's stipulate that right now. But what's your take on this back and forth in what was described at best as a frank conversation between the Prime Minister and President, at worst, something of a spat?
Well, I think unnecessary and harmful were good phrases from Senator McCain. It's just needless poking the eye of a good friend. In fact, we have no better friend in the world than Australia. And I don't think people quite appreciate how vital that relationship is. They have fought with us in every conflict going back 100 years. They have been our closest ally in terms of sharing of information, in terms of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, narcotics trafficking, human trafficking, in any endeavor that we're working on to keep America safe. We are interoperable with the Australians, and they work very, very closely with us, and they have made enormous sacrifices to support the United States. So not clear what advantage there could possibly be to the kind of interaction that was described.
When it comes down to kind of bottom line about this, I mean, you've got John McCain calling it harmful. Senator Lindsey Graham told me earlier that he thinks that this relationship, it will survive. It is stronger than one bad phone call. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think the strength of the relationship is deep. And, you know, we've woven ourselves deep into each other's fabric. And you see it not only in the national security space that I was describing, but you know,
so then is it much ado about, you know, since the relationship will remain?
Well, you know, it would be not much ado except for the fact that we've never had this. We've had people from different parties and different ideologies in the state, you know, in the Lodge, which is the equivalent of the White House in Australia, and the White House, and they've always gotten along. You know, it didn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat, liberal or Labor, everyone got along. The reason this is significant is that people in Australia were already nervous about this change, and they are looking at the...
Ambassador?
Yes?
Sorry, we're just short on time today with all the breaking news. Yeah. You have to let it go. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us at this hour.
Thank you for joining me at this hour. Inside Politics with John King starts right now.
JB! JB!
John and Kate, thanks much. Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thanks for sharing your day with us. Day 14 of the Donald Trump presidency, and there is disruption everywhere you look. Not, for example, what you traditionally hear at the solemn national annual prayer breakfast.
We had tremendous success on The Apprentice, and when I ran for president, I had to leave the show. That's when I knew for sure I was doing it. And they hired a big movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take my place. And we know how that turned out. The ratings went right down the tubes. It's been a total disaster. And Mark will never, ever bet against Trump again. And I want to just pray for Arnold, if we can, for those ratings, okay?
On Capitol Hill, the first cracks in Republican loyalty. The president is likely to get all of his cabinet picks, but at least one, just barely.
I will not, I cannot vote to confirm her as our nation's next Secretary of Education.
And on the world stage, Word of a tense call with a critical U.S. ally in the Pacific and a blunt warning after a missile test in the Persian Gulf.
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
General Flynn, just one of the new faces generating controversy. Here's another. The great manipulator is the label Time gives top Trump advisor Stephen Bannon, the driving force behind the new administration's America First views on trade and immigration. With us this day to share their reporting and their insights, CNN's Sarah Murray, Dan Balls of The Washington Post, Greg Miller of The Washington Post, and Mary Catherine Ham of The Federalist. The White House briefing set to begin any moment. We'll take you there live when it begins. The president is also about to greet some executives from Harley-Davidson. We'll bring you those pictures when they come in to us. Today is the first day on the job for the newly confirmed Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, who, thanks to a volatile world and an interesting boss, has his hands full.
I know this was a hotly contested election, and we do not all feel the same way about the outcome. Each of us is entitled to the expression of our political beliefs, but we cannot let our personal convictions overwhelm our ability to work as one team. Let us be understanding with each other about the times we live in as we focus our energies on our departmental goals.
We don't take sides here, but an excellent Patriots reference by the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, today. Among his immediate challenges, calming key allies who are alarmed, both by President Trump's words and his personality. That list includes most of Europe, Mexico, Canada, and it is growing. Just today, for example, word of an uncomfortable conversation with Australia's Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Scheduled for an hour, the call lasted less than half that, as the president bragged about his election and vented about an Obama administration agreement to accept predominantly Muslim refugees now in Australian camps.
The world is in trouble, but we're going to straighten it out, okay? That's what I do. I fix things. We're going to straighten it out. Believe me, when you hear about the tough phone calls I'm having, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. They're tough. We have to be tough. It's time we're going to be a little tough, folks. We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore.
Greg, your reporting is central to this story. I want to read from your story this morning in the Post. At one point, Trump informed Turnbull that he had spoken with 4 other world leaders that day, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, and that this, quote, was the worst call by far. He's untraditional. He's disruptive. Why does this matter?
Well, I think it matters for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us some insight into how he is interacting with not only foreign leaders, but close American allies. So they're subjected to the same vitriol that his political adversaries get on social media or news organizations get day to day. But also, it's just, you know, this is a critical American relationship. It's hard to think of another country that has been more steadfast in its support for the United States than Australia. From World War I through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And so it's really destabilizing. At least, I mean, I was on the phone with lots of Australian news organizations last night, really confused about what signal this sends to their country.
Right, and you look in the rearview mirror at the alliance, looking forward in the alliance, absolutely critical as China flexes its muscles in the South China Sea and elsewhere. The Australians are incredibly important. I want to show the pictures of the phone call because it's important. As we're getting to know this new president, we're getting to know his team and how he conducts himself on the world stage. You see there General Flynn, the National Security Advisor, and Steve Bannon in the room as the president makes these phone calls. And we know, they both think the Obama administration was weak, and they think the United States broadly, not just the Obama administration, should speak more clearly, more bluntly when it comes to these things. Air your differences. That's not necessarily all bad, but to Greg's point, Dan, it does make people a little unsettled.
Well, everybody's unsettled by this. I mean, he's the biggest story in the world right now, and almost every day he is doing something to disrupt a relationship, whether it's with an adversary or, as Greg says, with an ally. That is unnerving to people who are used to dealing in a different way. It's true that he was elected on an advocacy of change and a promise of change, and he's doing a lot of that. But he's breaking crockery at the same time, and the question is which is going to have the bigger impact long term.
Right. We thought Washington was the China shop and he was the bull. Apparently the world is the China shop and he is the bull. Sarah, you covered this White House. When they put out their statement after this call, it was traditional sort of everything was fine. We can discuss the good, close relationship. And then you hear this fabulous reporting afterwards about this very tense call and not hanging up the phone but abruptly ending a conversation like that. They like this, though, at the White House, right? As we sit here and say, how can you do this to an ally? everyone else around the world is on edge. They like this.
Right, even though they put out somewhat of a sanitized, whitewashed transcript of what actually, we've now learned, happened on that call, I think they look at it as Donald Trump doing exactly what he said he was going to do in his inauguration speech. If you look back at that speech, that very clearly put both allies and foes of the United States on notice that they are going to change up relationships. They are planning on shaking up the world order, and above all, they're prioritizing America ahead of everyone else. And I think that's sort of what we saw Trump doing in this call with Australia. But I do think what is worth noting is a senior administration official and the Australian Prime Minister both said at the end of the call, they both agreed that the U.S. is going to take these refugees. It was a pre-existing agreement. The U.S. is going to honor it. So he may have talked tough, but it ultimately didn't change the outcome.
Oh, and then the president tweets, I'm going to study this bad deal. He calls it a bad deal and says he's going to study it. So he communicates to his different audience as we go through this dumb deal, I guess, is the one. I want you, Mary Catherine, to listen here. John McCain, when he ran for president, he said he was the straight talk guy.
Right.
Apparently, he thinks Donald Trump is too straight.
We have had a close and best relationship with Australia. They fought alongside us in wars, including losing over 500 brave Australians in the Vietnam War, which some of us remember. And this, in my view, was an unnecessary and frankly harmful open dispute over an issue which is not nearly important as United States-Australian cooperation and working together, including training of our Marines in Australia and other areas of military cooperation and intelligence.
Speaking calmly and slowly there, but this is probably the fourth or fifth day in a row where John McCain has taken on this White House over some aspect of its foreign policy. So he's disrupting the world. He also has a lot of critics up on Capitol Hill who, frankly, are nervous about this president's worldview and very nervous about the two men we saw in the Oval Office with him there.
This is McCain's turf. It's his passion. It's probably where he's going to stay and get very comfortable running up against the Trump White House. Look, I think... Can I point to what I think is a fundamental problem with the fact that the White House is so different and pretty inscrutable, and much of the coverage has been, if I may, fairly frantic in the first 2 weeks. There's trouble trying to figure out exactly how important is each story, and exactly what was the tone, and exactly what are the motivations of people telling the stories. So as an observer of news and a reporter of news, I have some trouble parsing that, and I think that's one of the problems we're going to have to cope with moving forward a lot. But I do think on the substance of this, he's free to ask about this deal and say, look, you guys took a bunch of refugees, threw them in detention centers, and then we're supposed to bring them over there. That's a fine conversation to have. The tone in which he has it sounds very Trumpy.
But that's his style.
Yeah.
Is stir it up.
But as Sarah points out, he didn't change the deal.
Right. It's still the same deal.
Didn't change the deal. Tim Kaine calls it amateur hour, and again, he's talking about the Australia negotiations. But this is a bigger issue. Germany's on edge. The British Prime Minister was here. Then she goes home and criticizes the travel ban. When you talk to your diplomatic sources, national security sources, in terms of, to Mary Catherine's point, this is a Trump trademark. He sort of roils the water, gets everything boiling. Even if he wants an inch, he sort of asks for a mile at the beginning to get everybody on edge, and then he tries to get his inch.
Yeah, it's also just very transactional, right? You can see in this call, this 25-minute call with the Australian Prime Minister, he's not thinking about the broader complexities of this relationship. He's looking, what am I getting out of this 20-minute section of this conversation that I'm going to have to show for me at the end of this? And I think it's disorienting in some ways to allies. I think we were talking just a moment ago about how this deal appears to still be intact, although Trump signaled on Twitter that he was inclined to reevaluate it. And so if you're Australia, who do you believe? The American embassy there that's telling you everything is still go, or the president's Twitter feed?
That's a great point. What does it mean when the National Security Advisor walks into a White House briefing and says we're putting Iran on notice?
God, I would love to be able to answer that question. And we asked a lot of senior administration officials exactly what that meant, because it did feel a little bit like drawing a red line and then not having a plan for what you were going to do next. And we were told essentially this is the beginning of a deliberative process. They didn't guarantee an action would come out of that deliberative process, and they didn't take anything off the table. So maybe that means economic sanctions. Maybe it means military action. We really don't know. It seemed to be